Shabbat Shalom, and happy July 4th weekend. Wandering in the wilderness for over 39 years, Bnei Yisrael experienced another drought in Parashat Chukat. In the sweltering heat of the summer sun, boy, we can relate to that, they were feeling exhausted and thirsty. And Bnei Yisrael complained yet again to their leaders, Moshe and Aharon. God tells them that their thirst will be quenched. God will cause water to flow from a rock after Moshe speaks to that rock. Moshe then turns to the people and says, Shimuna Hamorim, listen now, you rebels, Hamin Hasela Hazen Otzi Lachem Mayim. Shall we bring forth water out of this rock? Moshe then raises his staff and proceeds to strike the rock twice. And God then proceeds to punish Moshe for his actions, telling him that he has lost his chance of leading the people across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Commentators disagree as to which aspect of Moshe's behavior was so bad that it brought on such a severe punishment. Rashi explains that Moshe's sin was that he struck the rock rather than speaking to it. Ibn Ezra claims that Moshe's sin was that he hit the rock twice instead of just once. Maimonides, Rambam, argues that Moshe's sin was in speaking harshly to the people by calling them rebels and saying, listen now, you rebels. Nachmanides, the Ramban, explains that Moshe's sin was in saying, Hamin hasela hazen otzi lachem mayim, shall we bring water out of this rock? Implying that he, Moshe, and Aharon, not God, had the power to miraculously draw water from a rock. Well, these commentators claim that the crux of Moshe's sin had to do with what he did or what he said. Other commentators say that Moshe's sin involved a failing in his character, that what he was being punished for was not an action per se or words that came out of his mouth, but just by failings in his character, such as losing his temper, showing cowardice, being callous, perhaps lacking the proper kavanah, intentionality and mindfulness, perhaps a lack of emunah, lack of faith in God. But regardless of which interpretation best explains the reason for the severe punishment that God meted out to Moshe, one question comes to my mind. Why did Moshe fail this test at this particular time in his life? After all, Moshe had been in a similar situation twice before. There are at least two other times where we hear about a drought and the people fetching, specifically about water. After emerging from the Red Sea in Parashat Beshalach in Exodus 15, the people had traveled for 3 days without finding water. And when they finally found some, they complained that it was too bitter. So God showed Moshe how to make the water sweet. Then again, at the end of Parashat Beshalach in Exodus 17, when the people complained about the lack of water at Rephidim, Moshe said to God, Oi, what am I going to do with these people? He didn't actually say oi, he didn't speak Yiddish, but he was pretty exasperated and he said, these people are almost ready to stone me. What do I do, God? And God patiently instructed Moshe, telling him, V'hikita batsur, you should hit the stone. If you strike this stone, water will flow from it. So it appears that Moshe had successfully overcome two similar challenges dealing with water shortage in the past. In fact, the second time he was specifically told to strike the rock, so clearly there is nothing intrinsically wrong with striking a rock. So why on this third occasion is Moshe's action, behavior, character, attitude, words, why is he judged differently? Why does he come across differently in this third time? Why is this time a mistake? Perhaps the answer can be found in a seemingly unrelated verse in this parsha. In Chukat, in Bamidbar chapter 20, we read, Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh vatamot sham Miriam vatikaver sham. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Tzin, and they stayed at a place called Kadesh. And it was there in Kadesh that Miriam died and was buried. And it's immediately after this verse that the Torah tells us that there was no water and that the people gathered in opposition to their leaders, Moshe and Aharon. There's a Talmud sugya in Masechet Ta'anit that explains that it was in Miriam's merit that the Israelites had a well of water, a Be'er Mayim, that miraculously accompanied them throughout their desert journeys. And when Miriam died, the water ceased. And this interpretation reads the sequence of events very simply and supernaturally. Miriam died, then that Be'er Mayim, that well, was no more. There was no water. And from this, you can infer that until then, there was water because Miriam was alive. The miracle of the wilderness well was provided to the people because of Zechut Miriam. But there's another way of reading this pasuk, this verse from the book of Bamidbar, chapter 20. Rather than reading it supernaturally, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks reads it naturally and actually has a psychological lens on this text. According to Rabbi Sacks, the connection between Miriam's death and the events that followed had less to do with a miraculous well and more to do with Moshe's very human response to the Israelites' kvetching. Why? What was so human about Moshe's response, and why Dafka now? Was there something very special about it? This was the first trial that Moshe had to face as leader of the people without the presence of his beloved sister. Now you have to remember the history of Miriam and Moshe. She was the caring older sister who watched over Moshe as he floated down the Nile in a basket. She was the one who had the presence of mind and the chutzpah to speak to Pharaoh's daughter and arrange for the child to be nursed by an Israelite woman, Moshe's own biological mother, Yocheved. Without Miriam, Moshe would have grown up not knowing who he was and to which people he belonged. Throughout most of the Torah's narrative, Miriam was a background presence. Miriam's claims to fame pale in the face of her more visible brothers, Moshe and Aharon. After all, Aharon was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and Moshe was God's emissary who led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt, brought them God's 10 commandments, and led them throughout their years of wandering in the wilderness. Compared to these two leaders of Bnei Israel, Miriam didn't appear all that remarkable. But we do get glimpses of Miriam's significance, not only when Moshe was little baby Moses in the basket, but also when he became an adult and Miriam led the women in song at Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. We gain a sense of how much she meant to Moshe when she and Aharon began to talk against Moshe because of his Cushite wife in Parashat Beha'alotcha, back in book of Bamidbar, chapter 12. Despite Miriam's negative talk, the Lashon Hara, that she committed, that sin, by speaking negatively about her brother and his wife, Moshe pleaded to God on Miriam's behalf. With simple eloquence, in the shortest prayer on record, Moshe uttered 5 Hebrew words that demonstrated how deeply he cared about his sister. El na rifa na la. Please, God, please heal her now. And here in Parashat Chukat, we get an even fuller sense of Miriam's influence if we see the connection between Miriam's death and Moshe's sin. It is in this parsha that Moshe faces a challenge without Miriam for the first time. So perhaps it's not surprising that this is the first time that Moshe truly loses his cool in the presence of the people in a way that perhaps was not warranted. Moshe's emotional response in Parashat Chukat may have been an effect of bereavement. Some who have suffered the loss of a sibling say that this loss can be even more profoundly disorienting than the loss of a parent. Perhaps because the death of a sibling is usually less expected. And Miriam was no ordinary sibling. Moshe owed her his entire relationship with his biological family, as well as his identity as one of Bnei Israel. Leadership can be a very lonely undertaking. But at the same time, no leader can truly survive on his or her own. Moshe's father-in-law, Yitro, told him this many years earlier. Seeing Moshe leading the people alone, Yitro said to his son-in-law, "You and these people who come to you you're all going to wear yourselves out, but you're going to certainly wear yourself out if you're going to try to get to everyone single-handedly. This work is too heavy for you. You can't handle it alone. Kaved mimcha hadavar, lo tuchal asohu levadecha. A leader needs others, at least three kinds of support. One, allies who will fight alongside him, troops or a team to whom he can delegate, and three, a soulmate or collection, a group of close friends to whom the leader can confide his doubts and fears, who will listen without a hidden agenda other than being and offering a supportive presence, and who will give him the courage, the confidence, and the sheer resilience to carry on. It's wrong to assume that people in positions of high leadership have thick skins. Leaders are often intensely vulnerable. They can suffer deeply from doubt and uncertainty. Leaders can be hurt by criticism and the betrayal of people they once considered friends. Because they are leaders, they may rarely show signs of vulnerability in public. They may project a certainty and confidence that they don't always feel. There's a book by Ronald Heffitz and Marty Linsky entitled Leadership on the Line. It was published years ago by the Harvard Business School Press, I think 2001 or 2002. And this is a quote from that book. Leaders need confidants, people who will tell you what you do not want to hear and cannot hear from anyone else. People in whom you can confide without having your revelations spill back into the work arena. A confidant cares about you more than about the issues. He or she lifts you up when you are low and gently brings you back to reality when you are in danger of complacency or self-congratulation. Almost every person we know with difficult experiences of leadership has relied on a confidant, or two or three, to help them get through. Maimonides, the Rambam, in his commentary to Pirkei Avot, counts this as one of the four kinds of friendships. He calls it the friendship of trust, chaver habitachon. And the Rambam describes this sort of relationship as having someone in whom you have absolute trust and with whom you are completely open and unguarded, hiding neither the good news nor the bad, knowing that the other person will neither take advantage of the confidences shared, nor will that confidant share what you've told him or her in confidence with others. A very careful reading of the striking of the rock episode in Parashat Chukat in the context of Moshe's early life suggests that Miriam was Moshe's trusted friend, his confidant, the source of his emotional stability. And after she died, perhaps Moshe could no longer cope with crisis as he had done in the past. Those who have to serve as a source of strength for others need their own sources of strength. The Torah is explicit in telling us how often God was that source of strength for Moshe. But even Moshe needed a human friend, someone who supported him. And it seems that that person was Miriam. A leader in her own right, she was also one of her brother's sources of strength. Even the greatest leaders cannot lead alone. Shabbat Shalom.